All right. Hello again. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cloud Lunch and Learn sessions. My name is Marco Soldo, and today we have our last session of our series of sessions related to Azure Fundamentals. We have again our Dwayne here with us explaining Azure security, business continuity, governance, and subs. I'll hand over to Dwayne right now, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them over the chat, and during the Q&A, Dwayne will be able to answer you any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Marco, and welcome everybody. Yeah, sorry about what happened on Monday. Europe changed times. United States did not. We do that this coming weekend after Halloween, so it fouled up everybody's calendars. So my apologies there, and hopefully everybody that wanted to join on Monday was able to join today. If not, this will be recorded and everything will be out on the Cloud Lunch and Learn YouTube channel to continue to learn and prepare for the Azure Fundamentals exam. So we have a lot to cover today. I just want to kind of give everybody a heads up. We might go over the hour, and there's probably a very good likelihood we will. This is generally a day-long class with when you build in all the exercises. I've pulled a lot of the exercises out, but it still generally takes me about 5 hours to deliver this content. So there's going to be some areas that I'm going to glaze over, and I'll let you know that. It's going to be particularly probably around support and subscription information, which is readily available really on Microsoft Docs, and it's really just studying that and understanding that. So, and you'll get a couple questions on those things, but I wanted to just kind of set the base for everybody, and that's really the end of this presentation anyway. So I'll have a good idea from a pacing standpoint of where we're at. So just to let everybody know and set the expectation that we might go over the hour a little bit, because I do have quite a bit of content that's backloaded here, but we've hit really the heaviest portion of things. Understanding the core compute services and the and storage services and platform services and databases are really the brunt and the focus of the Azure Fundamentals exam. Knowing what those services are, the naming and the uses of those, and at a high level is really what comes into the fundamentals piece. And then what we're going to talk about today and the pieces today kind of tie into those and bring those all together. I'm not going to take a whole lot of time introducing myself. My name's Dwayne Natwick. You can reach out to me on social media and ask any questions after these sessions on Azure Fundamentals. I'm happy to help you get ready and prepare for this exam. So let's talk about some of the Azure governance methodologies. And the first one here, and like I said, this is a fundamentals class, so we're not going to go really deep into things. It's really understanding what these services do for you. And what Azure policy does is it governs and helps you to govern the environment, both from a cost governance, security governance, as well as even just a standards and compliance governance. And there's a lot of things that you can do with that policy to do all those things. You can make sure that only certain and from a regulatory and sovereignty level, make sure only certain locations are able to be chosen within your subscription, so that you can adhere to GDPR regulations and things like that. You can set that within your policy so that nobody accidentally, then if you're in Europe or the UK, and require that all your services are in that region, that somebody doesn't turn something on in the United States that puts you at a compliancy risk. From a cost standpoint, you can identify what SKUs you utilize for, like virtual machines, that you only want to use B series and D series, or certain ones. You can put that within your policy. and that will help you manage your costs. Not allowing certain services to even be turned on, and those things help you from a cost standpoint. From a security standpoint, making sure Azure Security Center is loaded, make sure just-in-time virtual machine access is available, is turned on. Make sure Azure Monitor extensions and agents are loaded onto virtual machines and turned on. All of those things can be done within policies. And what really an implementation of a policy is there is a definition created, and there's hundreds of built-in definitions within Azure. So when you're getting started, you really don't have to build or create a definition. The definitions are there. You can search those definitions, look at those definitions, and how you're going to utilize those, and if those are what can help you get started and get you utilizing policy for governance. But you can also create custom policies if something's missing there. If you have a specific requirement, you can create those custom policies. You can assign it then to at the subscription level or the resource level. So if you have a subscription and you have resources, going back to to that GDPR example, and you have your services in multiple regions. You have services in the US, you have services in Europe, you have services in the UK, you have them in Asia. You could have resource groups in each of those regions, and then within those regions have a policy in place that only resources for that resource group get created in those regions. So it's very powerful from that standpoint. As and we talked about resource groups, I think 4 weeks ago. But resource groups are those ways to put resources together in a logical group, and one of those possible use cases for resource groups would be to put those in groups based on the region, so that you have all of that and can govern all that very easily from that standpoint. And then within policies are initiatives. And I was talking about this yesterday with AZ 500 class that I'm delivering this week, and clarifying what an initiative is. So within Azure policy, there are policies and initiatives. And what a policy is it puts a rule in place for that particular subscription or that particular resource group and everything that goes under that. The initiative is a group of policies. And a good example for a initiative would be some sort of a compliance regulation. So in the United States, we have NIST, the National Institute of Security Technologies standard, which is an overarching government standard that can be utilized. ISO is another one. I'll use ISO as a better example for those of you that aren't in the United States, but ISO 27001. There is an initiative within Azure policy for ISO 27001 that has all of the built-in policies combined within that initiative, so that if you assign that ISO 27001 initiative to your resources, it's going to audit all your resources for ISO 27001. So that right there helps you in your compliance, your regulatory compliance or your audit compliance to that ISO standard, if that is what you're aiming to accomplish within your data center environment. So, and when you put a policy or initiative in place, everything within the scope of that resource group or that subscription that you've assigned it to, and will report back to you in the dashboard that it's whether it is or is not compliant, and allows you to then remediate those resources that are already in place, and then will not let you initiate the deployment of resources that violate that policy going forward. So a very powerful tool there, and something I wanted to make sure we covered in depth, not just from an exam standpoint, but also just for an, from a knowledge standpoint and an understanding that it's very helpful within the Azure environment. But really what you want to understand is the differences in policies and initiatives, understand how they're assigned at subscription or resource group level are the key things, and what they can govern. And they really can govern, what SKUs go in place, what locations, are some common use cases within that. Role-based access control. We talked a little bit about this with identity. Role-based access control is what we utilize for fine-grained access to resources. It helps to provide that principal least privilege within your environment, enables or allows or disallows certain access to at the subscription level, the resource level, or all the way down to the resource level. So, down to a virtual machine. You generally have 3 different roles within that are kind of the high level roles. Actually, they're kind of actually saying 4 now, but primarily you have your owner, your contributor, and your reader, and then there's a user access admin role that they kind of have put into that overarching role assignments. The owner is essentially an admin where they have complete access to that resource, and they can also delegate access to that resource. Contributor has access to that resource and can work on that resource, can create resources just like an owner can, but they can't delegate that access to somebody else. And then a reader is exactly that. They can look at those resources but they do not have the ability to make any changes within those resources. So those are kind of your 3 overarching, and then you could have a virtual machine, owner, contributor, reader, a storage owner, contributor, reader. There's thousands of different built-in roles, and there are also you can create custom roles. So if you need somebody that has contributor rights to a virtual machine but needs to read network resources, you can create a custom role that ties both of those together, and those are generally inherited from the top down. Resource locks are another way to govern your resources here. There's 2 types of locks that you can put in place. There is read only, and then there's cannot delete. Cannot delete is actually, when you put it in place, it's called delete, but it is cannot delete. And you can see here what you have the capabilities to do in there. For cannot delete, you can read and update, so you can actually change resources. The only thing you can't do is delete. Read only is exactly that. It's read only. You can't make any changes to those resources within that resource group or subscription or resource, and you cannot delete that. So the read only is actually the most restrictive of the 2, and keep that in mind when you're going into the test to understand. That's the main thing to understand about resource locks, that there's 2 types. Cannot delete, which is also called delete. So if you see in the question delete, that's really when you initiate it or put it in place, it's called a delete resource lock, but it's a cannot delete resource lock, and there's read only. Azure blueprints they help you to audit and trace your deployments and maintain compliance and maintain some level of structure and consistency among your services. It's exactly just like a blueprint would be to building a building. It's setting forth the capability, what needs to be in place and for your deployment. And you can associate this blueprints within Azure DevOps to build artifacts and for pipelines and for tracking and auditing purposes. So not a real big thing to understand or know, but it's coming up a lot. Azure Blueprints is coming up a lot more as more and more people are utilizing Azure DevOps for continuous integration, continuous improvement, and how we're standardizing and maintaining our resources in our environment. And then the aspects of of subscription governance. And the main aspects here are you have your billing, your access control, and your limits on your subscription. So just to kind of think of it from how you're governing things, it goes along with what we were talking about with Azure policies, but what we're how we're billing, how we're reporting, how we're charging things back. Something we didn't talk about was tags within the environment. Some people utilize tags for their resources to assign specific resources to specific departments to bill and to provide chargebacks within their subscription. The access controls are obviously that boundary and that the level of access that a user or group has to that resource. So a security standpoint, and then the subscription limits, creating limits. You do have the ability to create limits and create budgets on your subscriptions to avoid going over budget on things, where there's alerts to your billing administrator, your admins when certain levels are being hit. I use it myself on some of my subscriptions that have certain spending limits that if I go over a certain amount in a day, it's going to alert me, and that's going to, from my demo environment, let me know that I'm using too much, something off before I left my class for that day. And here's tags. So here's some things on monitoring and reporting. So tags are mentioned, and I thought there was a slide on tags, but I didn't know whether I hit it or by accident. So tags are, like I stated before, it's really metadata when you create a resource. Whenever you create a resource and you go through creating that resource, there is a tag folder that you step through. Usually when I'm doing a demo, I don't really bother with tags, but from a enterprise governance standpoint, you're going to want to, you should want to use tags because it allows you then to create reports based on departments, based on owner. You can see here they're using 3 types of metadata within their environment. They're using an owner, so who created that, who the stakeholder is that owns that, what department they're in, and what kind of environment. So you could have, Joe that's in marketing and production. You might have Jane that is in development. The environment is a development environment, and then what the cost center is, engineering or DevOps and things like that, from that standpoint. And you need to, as an organization, and is to have a standard approach to that. And one of the best practices is to probably not to exceed like 15 tags. 15 tag types within your environment. Otherwise, it becomes too hard to manage. Is kind of the best practice that I've heard around utilizing tags and taking that approach to tags. Creating a spreadsheet that is publicly accessible for anybody that's creating resources to follow along and utilize when they create those resources. And putting tagging in place can be governed by an Azure policy as well, that if somebody doesn't put a tag on a resource, it flags that requirement and makes you go back and you have to put that in when they deploy that resource. So you can maintain that governance and maintain the tagging requirements through your organization through utilizing Azure policy. Azure Monitor is the from a monitoring and management standpoint, the main and primary piece to the puzzle, essentially. What Azure Monitor does is it ties into every resource within the Azure environment. There are additionally resource or agents that you can put on premises, virtual machines, and resources. There's Network Watcher that you can use for hybrid environments as well. So you have the capability to collect activity logs and performance metrics on any of your resources within within the Azure environment as well as any hybrid environment. So even, it's an agent. So if you have virtual machines that are running in an on-premises data center, in AWS, in Google Cloud, you can put those agents in virtual machines, monitor, bring all that into the into your Azure infrastructure and utilize Azure Monitor and Azure Log Analytics and Azure Security Center, and we'll talk. I think we'll mention Azure Sentinel for a security event management system. Utilize, and Azure Monitor is the back end to all of that. So if you're going to monitor and manage your systems, and you don't already have maybe a management system that loads that has agents, one of the things as you start using platform services, you may still need to utilize Azure Monitor, even if you're using a third party within your organization now, just to collect those logs and feed those into your own third-party system as well. This is the collection mechanism. Azure Service Health is a piece and a component to the Azure environment and provides the status of your services. And many of you may see, on social media, sometimes we'll see, there's an outage here, there's an outage there from certain, Azure, Microsoft resources, or Microsoft, if you're following different Microsoft accounts like Microsoft Support, Azure Support account. Microsoft 365 does the same thing. If there's a service outage, it will show you that within the Service Health, and that Service Health portal is within the Azure environment as well as within the Microsoft 365 environment, and it gives you a global view of those services. So if you have a service that's out and you don't know why, and it's not just a single resource within that particular service, it's every piece of that service. Go to the Service Health portal first and see if there's an actual Microsoft outage that's causing that problem in your region. And usually it's usually a region affected type outage. And so if you're diagnosing a problem, it's a good place to look first before you start spinning your wheels, wondering if I did something wrong, or if somebody else in my organization, tripped a switch or something like that. That's where this will come in. It gives that status. It gives it gives the ability, the state of the services. It'll show and provide a diagnosis, and you can get support if you find that that it's not an Azure problem, and things like that within the Azure Service Health portal. And here, as I was kind of already saying a little bit about Azure Monitor and integrating Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor is that base brick to the wall where Azure Monitor integrates into those services and analyzes and provides visualization and integration within the entire monitoring and management ecosystem. And you can see here, some of the points here where Azure Monitor for containers and virtual machines, as well as applications. There's application insights. Any of those services like application insights, log analytics, Azure Security Center, even Azure Policy, and Azure Sentinel, it is all grabbing the information that is being gathered by Azure Monitor, and that's really what it comes down to. And all of that information, that data, can provide you with the ability to respond to alerts. Here, response to auto scaling. It's looking at the performance data from Azure Monitor to do auto scaling and to scale up and scale down and out and in your resources. Actually, out and in your resources for auto scaling. So if you're trying to auto scaling on your website, on your virtual machines, where you don't want to add virtual machines when a particular performance criteria is met. And we talked about auto scaling a bit back in the first session when we talked about compute resources. Azure Monitor is looking at those performance metrics. They're looking at the performance of that CPU, and we're hitting that threshold. That's going to be what adds an additional virtual machine for better performance. So those are some things to think about there. So now let's get into some privacy, compliance, and data protection standards. So here, we're going to talk at a high level around, around this, and keep in mind that what we were talking about in terms of Azure policy works very closely with this, as well as, like I said, Azure Monitor is looking at those resources as well, and activity on those resources. And this is just a really, really short list. Because if you actually go to Microsoft's Compliance Center, you can just very easily look that up on Bing and put in Microsoft Compliance Center, and it will show you all of the attestations that Microsoft has, and what it puts you to a point to be able to get there yourself. One of the things that I always try to point out to people around compliance to regulatory standards is that even though Microsoft says that 365 or Azure complies with these standards, and Microsoft is compliant with these standards and audited on these standards, it does not mean that you as an organization are, just because you're consuming that service. There are a lot of controls and many more controls that you're required to put in place in most cases and with most services to maintain your compliance. And that's where those policies and initiatives can help you get there, because it will audit your services for things like HIPAA or NIST and tell you where controls are missing, and prepare you for that audit and prepare you for that certification on your own level. But the great thing about Azure is it gets you a good portion of the way there, because you don't have to worry about all of the controls and things that go into the physical infrastructure and the physical network and the physical building that is required for many of these regulatory standards. So it gets you there a lot quicker if you are an organization that's been around, but now all of a sudden, I've got I'm doing a government contract, or GDPR regulations. I need to make sure I'm complying with those now. I'm getting audited on those. I'm doing business. I'm a United States company doing business in Europe. How do I comply with GDPR standards? I'm a United States healthcare organization, or I'm starting to do business with a healthcare organization now within the United States. How do I comply with HIPAA regulations? Putting those particular resources within Azure gets you a good step of the way there. Plus, there are initiatives in place to monitor your resources and to get your resources to that level and on the way to that level of compliance. And then Microsoft's privacy statement. You can go to microsoft.com/privacy statement and read, what Microsoft puts in place. Key thing here is that it explains, how Microsoft handles data, who processes it, the who, what, and where of what happens with your data. And that's the key thing to understand here. What Microsoft's privacy statement is. That's they have to comply with that, because they're handling lots of user data. And this should put you at rest on who and what handles your data and how it's processed and handled within the Azure environment. And then Trust Center as well. Again, Microsoft.com/Trust Center. This provides the information around Microsoft's products and how what their policies and practices are around their services and what the roles specific within the organization. Very similar to the privacy statement, but also this is more technical around how resources can be used, how you should use resources as well. So it provides some guidance as well within there. And Service Trust Portal, this one's a little bit different. Instead of Microsoft.com/, it's servicetrust.microsoft.com. Very easy just to go into Bing and put Microsoft Service Trust Portal and it'll pop up. And this is a website for that helps with compliance and helps to understand and find the audit reports, the public audit reports of Microsoft services. So all those attestations that we hit on, like 6 of them or whatever on a couple slides ago, it'll show all their attestations. It'll give you the information that you would need potentially to give to an auditor from a Microsoft side of things to show compliance of the physical infrastructure as you build your compliance for those particular standards and those regulatory audits. And compliance manager, sorry, I missed cleaning up this slide a little bit. But what this is again, another dashboard that provides a summary of the data protection and compliance status. So a lot of resources within the Microsoft ecosystem to look at and find recommendations. One of the things that Compliance Manager will do is it will give you recommendations for compliance within it. One thing it does not do is it does not guarantee any level of compliance, and that's, like I said before, just because Microsoft says that they're compliant to GDPR doesn't make you as an organization compliant to GDPR when you create resources within Azure. And that's something just to make sure that you understand at a high level, just from an organizational standpoint, that that there are still things that you have to put in place to do that. Government services within Azure. There are Microsoft within the United States has specific data centers for government, for high level federal government's utilization. It's physically isolated from all the non-government. So United States federal agencies, state and local governments generally need to utilize that for some ITAR and NIST and FedRAMP standards. It's probably nice for you to look into what these standards are and what FedRAMP are, and understand just that there is a specific government data centers in the United States. Just from a high level standpoint, you might get a question around the Azure government, what it's utilized for. Just because you're not in an isolated data center doesn't make you non-compliant to different government standards either, because Microsoft does isolate all their subscriptions, and for the most part, a lot of governments can run in the Azure environment. They don't have to be in a government data center, even in the United States. It's usually for those high level, highly secure, confidential environments like the Department of Defense and things like that, where the federal government in the United States requires that government data center. One thing with the government data center is it usually lags behind in terms of services. Once they become GA in the non-government data centers, it's generally a lag before it becomes readily available within the government data centers. And then last one here, they also want they used to bring up the German sovereign data center. They've changed that to the China data center, but there is a specific sovereign data centers in China are run by 21 Vianet, and it's physically separated from all of the Azure cloud services, specifically in China, operated by Azure China, and all data is required to stay in China. So key thing there that, if you see anything about China, think about 21 Vianet, and that it's an isolated data center, essentially. Very difficult to, if you need to do business and work with resources within China, make sure that you're utilizing the China data center. Make sure you're providing separation from your other resources that are outside of China, so that you're providing proper governance and not getting yourself into a potential legal binding between your local government and the Chinese government. So let's talk a little bit about the different subscriptions and how the subscriptions work. So it's important to understand at a high level what these are. The Azure subscriptions are really, the authenticated and the access to your Azure accounts. And they're also the billing and also the access control boundary. So when you create a subscription, you're creating your Azure Active Directory environment as well. So it's important to understand how the different subscriptions work, and that an account can have one subscription or multiple subscriptions within it. So I have a account that I created when I created my initial Azure account, and I have different different directories within it that might have different subscriptions. So there's different subscriptions that you might have in there, which, here you got, maybe a production subscription, a test subscription, a development subscription. So keep that in mind, that it's not, once you create your account, that you only have one subscription in there. You could have multiple directories, multiple accounts within there. Here are your different options here. Generally, unless you're working for a large enterprise, a large enterprise account probably has an enterprise agreement. So they've made a commitment to Azure. They are utilizing that also with like their on-premises Windows licensing for Windows 10, Windows Server, and things like that. They've got a 3-year agreement with Microsoft, and they've put their Microsoft 365 licensing in there, and they've also built in a Azure commitment. There's a lot more flexibility in management of that. They get a management portal of their own. Generally, most businesses are, today are going to set up really a standard subscription. And there's, the free subscription, which we'll talk about in a minute. Generally a pay-as-you-go, where you've got your credit card online and you're getting billed every month to that credit card. There's student accounts, and then there's some specific accounts like the pay-as-you-go dev test, Visual Studio accounts as well, that you might get and that you can get through different programs. Like I get a MSDN subscription with a certain level of credits every month as an MCT. I get another level of subscription as an Azure MVP as well. Microsoft, if you're in different programs, you get certain levels. If you're a CSP, a cloud solution provider, you get a certain amount of credits per month in a test type subscription that you can utilize for testing and for education within the Azure environment as well, outside of your production pay-as-you-go type subscription. So those are some things to know there. Here's something to know about your subscription account. When you first get into Azure, if you've never been in Azure before and never created an account in Azure, I recommend that you, as you're learning Azure and you're working within the Azure environment and trying to learn about the Azure environment for fundamentals exam or for any of the other exam, is create a free account. You get 12 months to utilize $200 worth of credit. I always tell people there are 3 things that really cost you money within the Azure environment. Actually, three and a half, I'll say. The primary levels of cost within Azure are compute. So virtual machines, databases, things like that. Anything that's got a CPU tied to it, that's going to cost you. Storage, but not until you start loading data into it. That storage is going to cost you, which also includes if you turn on Azure Monitor, logging starts going into a storage account and costing you money, and networking. You don't get charged for data going into Azure, but you get charged for data going out. So as you create resources or you're accessing data within Azure, that's a cost. Networking is not a huge piece. It's really the compute and the storage that become possible cost issues. And then my caveat is also Azure Firewall. Azure Firewall and some of those services could cost you money if you turn on an Azure Firewall. Those cost about $25 a day. So if you're playing with Azure Firewall, make sure you turn it on, play around with it, turn it off. Things like app services, you can create a free tier of that. Azure Functions, Logic Apps, even like Azure Sentinel, Azure Security Center, at a base level, don't cost you anything. They're free, and you can get free trials for like Azure Security Center for the Defender level of that to look at what it does for compliance and things for 30 days. So there are hundreds of services within the Azure environment that are free. So so don't be afraid to get into the Azure environment. And like I said, you can set up billing alerts to avoid you going over that. You know, like I said, I set up an alert at like $20 to send me an email if I go over $20 for that day. That helps me to control on one of my subscriptions that has a cap every month of going over that and then getting into a situation where I've got to teach a class and I don't have any credits left, and it's going to cost me money. So things to think about there. And you know, one of the things about the free account, like I said, you set it up. You can only set up one free account. Key thing around that is once you set up that free account with your name and your email and your credit card, because you do still, even though it's free, you still have to put a credit card in. Those three pieces of information then are tied to that particular free account, and Microsoft knows that. So if you use that $200 credit or that 12 months expires, whichever comes first, you don't have that free account anymore. And what you or not 12 months, 30 days, sorry. You know, if you start using that for 30 days and then have your services, and then you want to go back in and create another free account, you can't use that name, you can't use that email address, and you can't use that credit card again, because it's going to flag any one of those. So if you go in and I create an account with Dwayne Natwick and I use my Outlook.com account and I use my debit card, and I go in again and use Dwayne Natwick again, use a different domain email address, and use a different credit card, it's going to flag my name. So I'm going to have to change my name a little bit if I get a, just to make sure you understand that. If you've created a free account before, you can't create another free account unless you've got different aliases that you can use. Then we have our management group. So and this first level management group here is really in terms of a enterprise agreement account. You don't have management groups in a typical pay-as-you-go type subscription within, you know, so if you've got an enterprise agreement, then you've got a management group. They've got a portal that they can then manage their subscriptions in. Typically what you're going to have is you're going to have the subscription level down where you've got your subscription that you log in. CSPs would have a management group too, because they've got their CSP portal where they've got all of their customers in, and that's ultimately also a management group. But typically when we talk about management groups, we're talking about the high level to manage multiple subscriptions within that. So you've got a CSP and you've got an EA agreement from there. We then have our subscriptions. So we have different subscriptions, and then we have the resource group and the resources under that. So those are your key hierarchy to managing the environment. And then real quick, Azure Marketplace is where, you know, Azure services are independent software vendors, and CSPs can create services to offer in the Azure Marketplace. So you can get a lot of third-party services. It's where you can get for, you know, say if you have a standard for Palo Alto or Fortinet firewalls, you can get a virtual appliance within the marketplace that runs within the Azure environment to maintain those standards rather than using an Azure firewall potentially. So it's really where Microsoft partners can put their own products in there for others to consume, where they're sharing, you know, they might be sharing their intellectual property, or they're sharing a physical software or physical virtual appliance within the environment. And there's like 10,000 products within there, so you can find just about anything in there. You know, so, you know, different extensions for say semantic antivirus, anti-malware software, things like that. You can all find that within the Azure Marketplace, and it's really easy to, you know, it's just like finding any other resource within there. You can go in and do a search and find those services when you go in to stand up any kind of resources. So let's talk about some planning and managing of costs. And we've talked a little bit about that when we talked about talked about the Azure Azure policy services, but here's some things around costs, around the main customer types that we've talked about a little bit. I mentioned enterprise agreements and enterprise accounts. Then there's the web direct accounts where, like I said, you pay as you go. You put in a credit card. Lots of companies do that from that standpoint. And then there's the cloud solution providers, or CSPs, which I did bring up briefly, but let's talk a little bit more about that, since the enterprise agreements, like I said, enterprise agreements are large companies, large organizations have signed an agreement with Microsoft. They've signed an agreement for all of their Windows licensing, all the Microsoft 365 licensing, all of their, their Windows Server, their Windows 10 licensing. Maybe, maybe they're not using Office 365, they're still using Microsoft Office, they're using SQL, things like that. Licensing purchases go through that enterprise agreement, and previous to about a year and a half, or actually probably 2 years ago now, or maybe, yeah, it was about a year ago. About a year ago, Microsoft actually took Azure out of that enterprise agreement. So if a EA customer did not already have a Azure spend commitment within their enterprise agreement, they can't go back as of, like, I think September or October last year and add that into there. They have to actually create a new cloud enterprise agreement for Azure. So one of the things that Microsoft's wanting to do is push more of that business to their partners, to their CSPs, which what a CSP does is they will provide pay-as-you-go services and provide it as a, generally provide it rather than a company having to put their credit card on Microsoft, on Azure to create a subscription. They'll take the burden on of the billing, and the CSP will get billed monthly by Microsoft for all of their customers within there, and then that CSP then bills as part of their managed services and part of their consumption to the customer as one lump sum, or one bill that they get from there. So it provides more flexibility to the customer. Provides, most CSPs don't just sell Azure subscriptions. They're going to sell some level of managed services. Many of you on this call may work for a CSP where you're providing some level of additional value add services, is from a administrative standpoint or development standpoint or a security standpoint to the end user enterprises, that and also then billing those Azure services. So that's what a CSP really comes from. And I mentioned some factors about cost, and generally, like I said, compute, storage, and networking are your main cost features within Azure, and those come down to the resource type within this slide, as they're talking about these three primary factors of your resource type, what that service is, and where that location is. So depending on the location and the region, you might have some variance in cost. So that's important to understand when you're pricing something out for a customer, that depending on the region, it might be cost prohibitive. It might be a data center that is not one of the data centers that is a primary data center. We're going to talk about zones in a minute to understand where some of those those services that those data centers that are early adopters for services, when they go GA, like I said, government data centers generally don't get services right away. There are other regions that might also not get services right away, and understanding how that works and how the costs work there, the usage rate of those services, and some of those differ between, like I said, enterprise, web direct, and CSP. Enterprise customers that have enterprise agreements generally have negotiated discounts, so they might get services at a little bit different rate than somebody that's consuming it at a direct level with their credit card. And CSP customers might also provide some level of discount off of the web direct cost as well. And then, like I said, so zones in terms go into play in a couple different levels. Zones can take in when you think like Zone 2 and Zone 3. From a cost basis, like I was talking about in terms of locations, like I said, you're probably going to see differentiators in cost from Zone 1 to Zone 2 to Zone 3 on certain services, and it's not across the board. So keep that in mind, that it's not like, oh, I'm not going to use Zone 2 because that's going to be more expensive than Zone 1. It might not be for specific services. It might be for newer services at a certain point. The key thing here is is if you are working as a global organization and you have services within the US and Europe, to make sure that you're trying to utilize Zone 1 regions, because what it also does from a bandwidth purpose is it provides the backbone and the bandwidth that's going to decrease your latency. And you can see on this slide that that there is different pricing for outbound data transfers. So like I said, data, for the most part, data transfer inbound is free, but outbound is not. So data traversing between regions could have a cost base to them if it's going back and forth, because you have inbound and outbound happening at the same time. So you might have costs, and the costs, if you are matching up Zone 1 services, is going to be lower Zone 1 to Zone 1 than a Zone 1 to Zone 2. Excuse me. And to control those costs and to understand those costs at the beginning, before you start standing up services, is the pricing calculator. And again, you can go on Bing, search Azure pricing calculator, it'll come up. It's just a web interface to go into and to calculate and to look at your resources and to review what the cost is. And you can put what region it is, see what the cost difference is, and things like that. So I recommend you go out and look at that. The total cost of ownership calculator is helpful as well, where you can actually pull up what you have in your current data center, look at what you're going to put up in the Azure environment, and it'll show you the differences in cost over, a year, 2 years, 3-year type span. So you can show your if you're presenting this to a customer or you're presenting this to your own management, you can take a look at that and show them, here, if we move this this SQL database, for example, to Azure, we're going to save this amount of money over the course of, of this amount of time. I'm sorry, I'm speeding up a little bit because I see the time and I see how many slides I have left. So I'm going through these pretty quick. Like I said, this slide deck will be available to everybody on the Cloud Lunch and Learn GitHub. So these particular slides have a lot of information. Really, the information you need to study from is really on this on these slides. So keep that in mind, and you can look at that afterwards. But I just wanted to get things moving here. Like I said, the subscription and the cost modeling is probably a 5 to 10% part of the exam anyway. So keep that in mind. Minimizing cost, I've talked about a lot of these things, looking at Azure pricing and TCO calculators. Here's like monitoring usage. I've talked about that ultimately. Azure Advisor is a good, helpful tool as well. We didn't mention Azure Advisor, and we might have a slide on that coming up, but Azure Advisor will provide you recommendations. A lot of times when you go into the portal, it will pop up here, look at your Azure Advisor recommendations if there's new recommendations. So that'll help you there. I've mentioned spending limits. Azure reservations and hybrid benefits are good things to take into account. If you have a static type workload within your environment, I would like to use SAP as an example. SAP has specific requirements of what virtual machines you have to utilize. It's an IaaS type environment, and you need these virtual machines, you need these storage accounts and all of that, and it's pretty stagnant. It's not a dynamic environment where you're scaling in and scaling out and things. This is what you need for this many users, and that's it. You can utilize Azure reservations, where I'm going to use these resources and this amount, and it's going to cost me this amount over this amount of time. And they'll give up to, in some cases, a 70% discount on those resources. So if you are an enterprise organization that has, that's utilizing virtual machines and storage accounts and databases, you can decrease very significantly those services. Hybrid benefit allows you, if you've got an enterprise agreement with software assurance on your Windows Server licensing, and even some Linux licensing. I think Red Hat. I'm not sure if I think Red Hat, and I know SUSE just announced this. You can utilize your existing on-premises licensing and support subscriptions within the Azure environment without having to purchase new ones through Azure, and that saves you, roughly, they say 30 to 40% on licensing fees. So it helps you out from that standpoint. Like I was saying about location, choosing the right location, keeping up to date, knowing the latest offers and what Microsoft has done in terms of updates. Have they brought a new version to a particular service that's a lower cost service that we might move our workloads to? And then applying tags, as I mentioned, tags help to create those ownership areas. And this just, from a cost management standpoint, you have the cost management, the billing and invoicing portal, and you can manage your costs there and where they're coming from. All right, support options, and we'll hit this really quick. Told you I wasn't going to get this in an hour. But here with your support plans, we have different scopes of our support plans. We have our basic, developer, standard, and professional direct. And you can see here, key things to know on this slide is what comes with each of those, and really, what level of access you have to technical support is really the most important piece on this slide. So these pieces here, you don't get 24/7 access to resources until you have a standard subscription. You only get business hour support with developer. And whether it's standard or professional direct, it's 24/7 access to support engineers. So keep that in mind, especially with the test, because you might get a test question of what's the minimum level of support plan that you need to have 24/7 access to support. And from that standpoint, just for a side note on this, 24/7 level of support via email or phone, you still have to create a support ticket within Azure and then tell them to call you back or to email you. You don't actually get a phone number to support in most cases. Alternate support channels here, using MSDN forums, the tech community forums, different, the Azure support Twitter account. You can find things out like I was saying before about outages and things of that nature as well. And then there's also a knowledge center that'll help you as a searchable database to help you diagnose possibly and investigate problems and issues. I think we're on the home stretch here, so just bear with me. We're almost done. We want to talk about service level agreements for a second here. So key things around service level agreements is what availability Microsoft is guaranteeing within their accounts, or within their services. It's not it's a performance standard essentially and it's an uptime standard. So that's a key thing around service level agreements of what Microsoft is going to be responsible for, and actually provide some level of support and refund if necessary to your services if they have an outage. So that's a key thing around service level agreements and what it does. Here's kind of an idea of what you see key around service level agreements. Generally within the Azure environment, you're going to see a lot of 99.9 and 99.95%. There's very few services until you maybe get into like Cosmos DB, or what else might have that? Some app services have these 4 nines. You're never going to see a 5.9 of SLA within the Azure environment. They're not going to guarantee to that level. But if you look at this, it's still, 4 minutes a month, so, and hopefully those minutes come in off hours in cases. Key thing around, 99.9 is a typical for like a virtual machine, a single virtual machine. But if you put 2 virtual machines in a scale set with a load balancer, it brings it up actually to a 99.95. So as you're building your resiliency and your high availability within your environment, it's important to take into account these SLAs and what they are, how much downtime it is, and how much your organization from a business continuity plan is willing to bear. So that's an important thing. If your organization requires high availability, that they aren't down for more than 5 minutes a month, then you're going to have to find a way to build your services and your service levels and and adhere to the risks of adhering to only having 5 minutes a month. And this is just what they're going to say and stand by within your environment. So within their environment, they're going to say that this is the max. And if we go over if it's a 99.9 service and I've been down for an hour that month, you're going to get credited back for that, that difference there of 15 minutes. So that's something to take into account. That that's where those monthly fees and what might be credited back is based on. A lot of the services, even though they say that these are the SLAs, that's what they'll commit to. A lot of them will stay up and won't go down, 4 months on end. And then composite SLAs are important to understand the calculation of that. It's the SLA percentage of ones. If you're using a web app with a backend database, to get your actual SLA, you have to multiply those 2 SLAs together to actually get the SLA of that combined service. So understand the math there, and you can understand. The weirdest thing about this math and percentages is that the SLA actually goes down from the 2 SLAs that are higher. But that's how it works. If you do the math, that's what comes out. So keep that in mind as well. And then your application SLAs, establishing metrics and understanding how these work are important from a standpoint of what the mean time to recover, mean time to failures, recovery time objectives, and recovery point objectives. Those are things, in terms of when you're talking about backup and business continuity and disaster recovery plans that you need to take into account when you're talking about, your service level agreements. All right, I think it's the last section here, real quick. Public and private preview features. A lot of you may, that follow along with Microsoft usually hear things that are in private preview or public preview or general availability. That's what we're talking about here. Private preview is generally offered to specific, big customers, big partners. Sometimes Microsoft MVPs get access to these services to kind of beta test them before they go into public preview. Private preview, so it's generally a limited, elite number of customers or partners, or like I said, MVPs that get access to private preview. You don't generally see private preview services when you go into your Azure account. You will find public preview though. When you go into your Azure account and look at resources, you'll see that little preview in parentheses. Those are public preview services. So those have, all customers and everybody has a chance to utilize and evaluate those services. Probably not recommended to put it in a high availability business continuity level service when it's in public preview, because there's no SLA to public preview services. But then you get into general level services. So here's some different things about preview features. I'm not going to go through that real quick, and you can see, you have the ability to provide free feedback in there, and then things go into general availability. So from there, once everything has been tested and all you know, most or if not all of the bugs are fixed, then they go into general availability. Now your SLAs kick in on those services, and you can utilize those in production standpoint with peace of mind and some level of SLA support. When services are in public preview, this is a good question to understand. You can get support from Microsoft on public preview services. You don't get SLAs on them, so that's something to understand there. Services and feature updates. You do have, you know, there is ways for updates. There's updates provided for services, and you can review in Azure Updates what updates are available, and you can subscribe to their RSS feed for that. So I got there in just over an hour. So woo! Any quick questions on what we covered today? And I thank you for standing with me. And I know I was talking fast. Just full disclosure.
No, I don't see anything. Alvaro is just thanking everyone. I'm not sure, Dwayne, do you want to, before people are going to leave, can we call the winner for this? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, before everybody drops, I want you to stick around for me here. Let me quickly here grab the names of who's here for our drawing for who is going to get a voucher for this. So give me a second here. Here, while you're doing that, I do have a survey that I need. I would like for you to complete as well.
Yeah, just post it on the chat so people can.
Well, yeah, not. I have a specific one as well, so I can't send a message for some reason. Here, can I'm going to chat you on Slack if you.
Yeah, chat me on Slack, and I will provide.
You can post this. This is for my training purposes. If you could fill out this this survey on metrics that matter for me from an MCT standpoint, I need these for my renewal. So if you could do that, if everybody could do that real quick while I enter everybody's name in here into a name picker, we'll go from there.
Thank you, Dwayne. I have posted in the chat. There is a link, so you can follow that link, and it's going to take you to the quick survey for Dwayne. Yeah, it will be great if you can all just participate in this. Thank you.
Bear with me. I'm just typing here quick. Just doing everybody's first name. Hopefully, I don't run across somebody with this. I'm almost done. There we go. All right. Jason Thompson, you are the winner.
Jason.
So congratulations, Jason. I will get you. So what you can do, if you could, is if you can either send me a message through, and on the screen here is my LinkedIn and my Twitter. If you can send me a direct message through either one of those, I will work with you to get your email address and send you a voucher code for the exam.
Thank you.
Sound good?
Brilliant.
So there we go.
Jason is happy. I hope he will.
Yep.
He will pass it. Yeah, so basically, Dwayne, do you want to add something for the last? Because I want to just let know everyone what's happening this week.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
I'm done. Thank you everybody for sticking with me today, and for those of you that have attended all 4 sessions. Hopefully, you feel good about attending and being a part of the and being ready for the Azure Fundamentals exam. Because I hope everybody that attended, I can see some good badges out of everybody on social media here in the near future.
Yeah, thank you, Dwayne. Thank you very much. I'm just gonna post right now in our chat here what's happening this week. So basically, last week we had a great present. Actually, it was a challenge. It was called Ideathon, which was organized by Cloud Lunch and Learn, and we had 2 teams there, and it was very interesting to see how people were solving different issues in terms of the dementia, and it was great. It went for a whole day. It was amazing. There will be, of course, we provide the updates. You can find it on YouTube as well. So basically, for this week, I just want to thank one more time Dwayne for this amazing sessions. It was very interesting to listen to him, to learn about the Azure fundamentals. And we will post this video soon on our YouTube channel, so you can see all 4 sessions at once. And you can follow up, and of course, you can follow up with Dwayne later on if you have any additional questions. Before we finish, I just put it in the chat. There will happen like 3 different things during this week, and starting from next week, we had a new session starting in terms of the DevOps series. However, today we will have our last session of Kubernetes series, Kali and Kubernetes dashboard. It's going to happen at 6 p.m. GMT. So if you are interested to see that, so feel free. I have included in chat, so you can follow up there. This Friday we have governance and automation series, introduction to RM template. So follow up there. You can sign up and see what's going on there. Again, it's the last session there as well. And as I mentioned, DevOps is starting next week, so feel free to join us. It's going to be very interesting to learn about it. I will definitely attend it. So just in case, if you have free time, feel free to join us. I wish to thank one more time to Dwayne for delivering this great session. Thanks everyone for joining us, and please use the link in the chat to provide our feedbacks for Dwayne, and we really appreciate your feedback. So I hope to see you next week, and of course tonight. Take care.
Yes, thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Cheers.